I am Nika Smith, a senior story producer here at Ancestry, and I'm super excited to talk to you all about finding your Juneteenth ancestors. We'll give folks a little bit of time to arrive. We have quite a bit of things to talk about today. As we get started, I just want to qualify everything. We've done a series of webinars here this year that have been geared towards African American genealogy and family history research. And one of the things that I want to qualify this conversation with is just to remind everyone that this is not a beginner session today. I will be mentioning beginner elements, but this is not a beginner session. The beginner session we have available for you to watch on YouTube for free at your leisure, and where we talk about the beginning steps, the building blocks of building your family tree, and what that means and how you do that. We also have webinars, previous webinars or virtual events that will help you learn how to build your tree, how to accept hints. I've also done them that will connect you back to finding your enslaved ancestors. With this particular session, there's going to be elements of that second one around finding your enslaved ancestors. But in particular, what we're focused on in this session is really trying to dig out and get information about ancestors that were alive to see the day of Juneteenth on June 19th, 1865. Again, being the day that General Gordon Granger came to Galveston, Texas, and announced the news of the Emancipation Proclamation. Now, if you recall, Emancipation Proclamation went into effect or is an executive order in January of 1863. So it was 2 years prior. And again, it was an executive order. It was not a law. The law that abolished slavery was the 13th Amendment, which was enacted in January, passed in January of 1865. And so we move, into June of 1865, which is obviously Juneteenth. But you have to contextualize this appropriately. Texas was an insurrectionary state. They aligned with the Confederacy. So that meant that the Emancipation Proclamation was, Texas was under that. They fell under the purview of that. And so that executive order applied to them. But if your family did not live in an area that was covered by the Emancipation Proclamation, technically, or in an area, if they lived in an area that was maybe in an insurrectionary state, but that particular spot was under Union control, the Emancipation Proclamation did not apply. So you have to really think about where your family lived, what was going on in the area, who was there, what control it was under at the time. That makes all the difference in the world in terms of trying to determine who your ancestor was that was alive for Juneteenth and what they were experiencing in those early days of freedom. So I just want to set that up, just because I feel like we need to have that proper context. If you've never read the text of the Emancipation Proclamation, you can go on to sites like archives.gov for our national archives, where it literally lists out the text. There are a couple states where certain counties and parishes were exempt. And notice I said parishes. So that means I'm talking about Louisiana. There were certain counties in Virginia that were also exempt from the Emancipation Proclamation. So we like to talk about things very blankety, but I always want to remind folks that it's not always that. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. One of the first things that I'm going to do is I'm going to actually show you the order that that basically created the instance of Juneteenth. And I'm going to be on newspapers.com for a little bit today. Just obviously to qualify what we're talking about. So this is the order from General Gordon Granger. And it's printed in the Galveston Daily News. And the reason why I'm doing a lot of newspapers today is because, especially when you're trying to qualify who in your family was alive for Juneteenth and what their lives were like, you also have to remember that the newspaper, whether it was a daily newspaper or a weekly newspaper, that was the organ by which the community was communicating about what was going on. And so when the general order went out on June 19th of 1865, in order to make sure that most people knew about what was happening, they printed it in the newspaper. And so this is the paper just a few days later in Galveston, Texas. And you see it's got the headquarters of the District of Texas. And if you talk about headquarters, we're talking about the Freedmen's Bureau. And again, we're going to be talking a little bit about the Freedmen's Bureau today. But if you see General Order number 3, the people are informed that in accordance with the proclamation from the Executive of the United States, again, Emancipation Proclamation issued by President Abraham Lincoln, who is the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves, and the connection heretofore existing between them becomes that of employer and hired labor. Pay attention to that. This order that that helps us commemorate, and that's the whole reason for Juneteenth, is saying that enslavers and the formerly enslaved go to a new relationship, which is employer and hired labor. The freedmen are advised to remain in their present homes and work for wages. The reason why I'm qualifying this is because when you're trying to find out who in your family was alive for Juneteenth, you have to also think about the fact that just look at this one order. It's telling the newly emancipated that they are to remain at their present homes and work for wages. They are informed that they will not be allowed to collect a military post and that they will not be supported in idleness either there or elsewhere. Now, why does this matter? When you're trying to get back as close to 1865 as possible and trying to find your formerly enslaved ancestors, you have to think about the fact that if we have orders like this going out from the US military by way of obviously the Freedmen's Bureau, and they're telling the newly emancipated to stay where they are, it is more likely that an ancestor, if you find them in 1865, is likely in the place that they were enslaved. So, with that said, I also want to follow up with this because 2 weeks later, we get even more, and it specifically tells the formerly enslaved to stay where they are. So the closer you get to 1865, again, I'm just sharing this, think about where you're finding your ancestors in 1870, and if you can get them there, you can likely figure out where they were formerly enslaved in order for you to get to 1865 and potentially find a slaveholder and to qualify who was alive and where they were in 1865. And this order that came out later for Juneteenth specifically tells them to stay where they are and that they, in order to do so, they would need to remain under the auspices of the Freedmen's Bureau. Now, some of you may be wondering, I'm trying to find out who my formerly enslaved ancestors are, or I'm trying to determine who was alive for Juneteenth. How is this order helping me? The reason why I'm going through this is because these orders that are going out through the Freedmen's Bureau are telling the formerly enslaved or the newly emancipated to stay where they are. So if you find them in the Bureau, in the Freedmen's Bureau records, which are available, it is highly likely that they are living in the same area that they were enslaved in. That's why we're going over this. So here's the thing. We're going to go into my tree because we've been working on this for the last 2 sessions, so we're going to go into it for the third. And people often will say, you know what, I can't get back to 1870. I can't trace prior to 1865. And when folks say that, I often think that they are maybe might be missing something. What do I mean by that? Well, if you have an ancestor who was alive on the 1870 census, you got to think about the fact that those individuals were alive in 1870. But you also have to think about the fact that if somebody was more than 15 years of age, they were alive for freedom. Think about that, okay? So if you find somebody on the 1870 census and they were at least 15 years of age, there's a high likelihood that those individuals were formerly enslaved. Now, that's only if, again, they were not free people of color before the war. So when you're looking at your tree, you want to make sure you're looking at individuals who were born before 1865. And these are people that you're finding hopefully on the 1870 census or on other records that are documented after 1865. On this tree, you'll see my third great grandfather, right? We've got me, parents on this level of grandparents, great grandparents, great great grandparents, and three times great grandparents. My third great grandparents on this particular line are born 1810 and 1820. They were on the 1870 census, which means that they were alive for the 13th Amendment and they were alive for Juneteenth. My great great grandparents, it's the same scenario where they were alive in 1870 and they were born before 1865. So those are my ancestors. Using the chat, who are your ancestors that were alive for Juneteenth that you know? Those of you who are here. Use the chat. Put their names in there. Who was alive before 1865 in your family? I'm seeing Jerry Daniels, Peter Brewer, Sylvia Head, Jacob Brayboy. Ooh, Brayboy is uh, I have a genealogy buddy that researches that same surname, and everyone is connected to it because it's such a unique last name. Valmont Cormier, Harriet Wheeler, Powell Scruggs, born in 1835. This is a good nugget. Finding ancestors were born before that and even had wills and monies to their children, which tells me they were of some means. They had 11 children and even were giving monies to grandchildren. Wright Tyson, Richard Clark, Samuel Paschal, right? Good. Ariana Kyle, Emma Bryant. Great. Wonderful names you guys are bringing up. Again, some folks get lost in the sauce because they think, oh, I have someone on 1870, but I haven't traced before that. If someone is on the 1870 census and they're not a child, they're not a baby that it was born in 1869, technically you've traced earlier than 1870. And if the person is older than that, if they're at least 15 years of age, they were likely enslaved. You're just trying to find the proof of how to get there. So don't think, and here's the thing, what if you haven't gotten to the 1870 census? What if you gotten to 1880, but you have someone who was born before 1865 on the 1880 census? You've traced earlier than 1865. And it may be too, maybe you have a vital record. Maybe it's a birth, marriage, or death. Maybe it's a death certificate for someone who is born about 1870. And based on the ages of their parents, let's say you didn't find their parents on 1870 or 1880. Maybe you didn't find this ancestor who was born in 1870 and you have their death certificate. Even if you have that scenario, didn't find the ancestor with the death certificate in 1870, didn't find their parents in 1870, but the names of the parents are listed on the death certificate that's happened well after that, you still likely traced before 1865. Because for a person to be born in 1870, let's assume their parents are at least 15 years old. You've traced before 1865. So do not minimize your stuff. All right, 1870 census. If we're trying to find out who's alive for Juneteenth, let me go back. Forgot a whole thing here. Okay, so to qualify Juneteenth again, we also have to think about when emancipation or the freedom of formerly enslaved people was celebrated in the location that your family is from. Texas celebrates it or celebrated it June 19th. But in other places in the United States, they did not celebrate freedom on that day. And this may be news to some of you, right? We have the collective federal holiday that exists now called Juneteenth on June 19th, but in different places of the United States and in the Caribbean, people celebrated freedom on different days. Again, going back to the newspaper, if you don't have a newspapers.com subscription, I highly suggest getting it. Bundle it up with your Ancestry subscription because then it's cheaper. Again, you're getting context on what was going on in the daily and weekly lives of your ancestors in the newspaper. Don't miss this. So in Kansas, Emancipation Day was on August 1st. And here is, you will literally find accounts of what the Emancipation Day celebrations were like in a respective area. So to quote this one, since the emancipation of the slaves in Great Britain, notice this is in Kansas, and they're saying that they're celebrating the day that the informally enslaved who were in British colonial dependencies, which again, Listen, that is locations that were under British control in the Caribbean. These folks in Kansas celebrated that Freedom Day, which was on August 1st. It was not Juneteenth. It was not in June at all. And no, all the states are free. All the formerly enslaved, former slaves are freedmen. A larger expression of joy and congratulation will go from the United States on the 1st of August than ever before. The freedmen honor about 4 are not a whit behind others elsewhere. And they talk about who spoke and who was at the respective Emancipation Day events. Have you gotten a newspaper stories and events index hint on Ancestry for your ancestor around 1865 or even thereafter, and it's an Emancipation Day celebration that your ancestor was a part of? A lot of these synopses, they will actually tell you the time that it happened, who was going to speak. Here's another one in Iowa. And note, they're celebrating on January 1st. That's because in some areas, they recognize the day of the Emancipation Proclamation, the executive order. That was the Freedom Day they celebrated. So in Iowa, they're saying the colored people of this place will celebrate Emancipation Day next Monday by a parade with and other exercises at Harris Hall in the evening. Monday will be the second anniversary of President Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. We go to another one. We've got the Sacramento Bee. We've got the South Carolina Emancipator. There's all kinds of newspaper synopses of these Emancipation Day celebrations. So you may want to go and look for your respective ancestors in the newspaper, look for your stories and events index, see if those hints are coming up, and then do an outright search in your respective location for Emancipation Day celebrations. You can put in the term Emancipation Day, Freedom Day, formerly enslaved. You can qualify it in a number of different ways. And my connection is acting a little wonky today, so I'm going to go ahead and refresh these articles so that I can share them with you. So here's one in Connecticut, in Hartford. They are reporting about the folks in New York and Brooklyn and them celebrating Emancipation Day. Again, this is an August one. So it's possible, again, your family may not have celebrated in June. So the date you're looking for may be in August, or it might be in January, or it might be in June, or it could be a complete other day. All right. So we've got our general orders done. We've got our tree. We looked at our tree, who was alive, who do we have documented. Let's go into certain collections that we can talk about. This is where we were before. So your goal always is to try to trace to the 1870 census, okay? 1870 being the census that was the first one that documented those who were free people of color and the formerly enslaved in the United States, okay? So we want to find somebody on 1870. So the 1870 census is key. Use the chat. Have you found ancestors on 1870 who you believe were formerly enslaved? And we're going to bring one up for one of my ancestors so you all can see. And one of the things I also want to point out is sometimes with the 1870, again, if you're looking at the community, if we go back to that general order from General Gordon Granger, where again, Freedmen's Bureau is telling, US military is telling formerly enslaved to stay where they are. If you're finding them as close to 1865 as possible, there's a high likelihood that those individuals are living in the exact same community that they were enslaved in. But you also have to remember that there are 5 years between when the 13th Amendment passes and the 1870 census. So some of those folks, they may have moved around quite a bit in that time period. I can say that I know that for my respective ancestors, they were not living in the exact same place that they were enslaved in. In fact, they had actually moved closer to where my family land is today. So let me go ahead and share my screen again now that this is loaded. All right. So Here we are in Carroll Parish, Louisiana, which became East Carroll. This is only one page. For some reason, the U.S. Marshal that took the census at this time, um, they really broke these communities down like to minutia. And so there's only one page that my third grade grandparents are on. But you're looking at all kinds of things. Who is living around them? There is a planter here with $3,000 worth of personal estate named W.R.C. Lyons. There's another planter named J.E. Old, who is $16,000 worth of real estate. And then there are several farmers, a Hamlin family, a White family. Unfortunately, with this particular census, the enumerator or the assistant marshal, they only recorded the first initial of these folks that were on this page. Thankfully speaking, I'm just glad that this person actually recorded my ancestors' full names. Because if you look at this page, you all, everyone else for the most part has initials. So just be glad. I'm very glad that on this one page, they actually recorded their actual names because everyone else has initials. I don't know. I, in fact, this is very interesting. I actually did not notice this until we're talking about this right now. Full transparency. Did not realize everyone else on the page has an initial, with the exception of maybe a couple households up here. Everyone else does. That is crazy pants. I say that because as a new researcher, I can imagine if I had this record and I just had a K atlas and an R atlas, but I didn't know their first names and they didn't make it to the 1880 census. Like, I really want you all to understand how much like good energy and juju and all kinds of stuff that has to happen in order, because there are folks, I mean, I've seen it time and time again where folks are struggling just to figure out what that K is or what that R is. All the rest of these people on this page, if they didn't make it to 1880, you all, they're descendants, unless these children in this household live to get a death certificate where this G. Briggs is named Gregory Briggs, they're struggling to get the person's first name. Right. My gosh. That's perspective, to say the least. All right. 1870. Your goal is to try to get here. You're looking at the community. This is a very small one. It's one page. You have a number of farmers who are working likely with these other two planters. Because I've researched this branch of my family earlier than this, in fact, King and Rachel, King in particular, I've have documented as an enslaved person as early as 1824. So we're talking 200 years in the United States. I know that his former slaveholder was not alive for the 1870 census. He actually died in 1861. If you go back to the previous session that we did, I actually showed the will of that man where he names King and Rachel in it. And I have several slaveholders. My ancestors outlived 6 slaveholders. 6. King was first found in Kentucky. Then that slaveholder passed away. His son became his enslaver. That son took my ancestor down to southern Louisiana. That slaveholder died. His wife inherited King. She took them to Mississippi, which is where he meets Rachel. Then she passes away. Her uncle gets them. He takes them to southwestern Arkansas. Then he dies. And then his sister and nephew-in-law and nephew take my ancestors to Northeast Louisiana, which is where you find them here. Then that sister passes away. Her son-in-law then becomes the sole owner. That's how we get to the will that we saw in the last session. They outlive 6 slaveholders. Some of you, it may not be that many slaveholders. But again, as you start this journey, you don't know what you're going to find. So King and Rachel are alive for Juneteenth, right? Oh, someone says sounds like they were cursed. Maybe they were, I don't know. It was the same slaveholding family. They just went from, pretty much two generations, three generations. They stayed, but the surnames changed because of women. You know what I mean? It's a daughter, a sister, all of that. But it was tracing the slaveholding families to find that. So 1870, big deal. Freedmen's Bureau, we talked about this earlier. This is an important record set because in some locations in the United States, in particular, Louisiana, Mississippi, Virginia, you have records for the Freedmen's Bureau that actually predate 1865. They are in a part of the collection that are called pre-Bureau records, and they begin in 1863 in some spots. Um, with these pre-Bureau records, what they do is they um, they help you understand what was going on at the time. You've got letters, you've got, oh gosh, you've got labor contracts, you've got school records, you've got all kinds of stuff in the Freedmen's Bureau. And it operated for the most part in the states that were held as part of the Confederacy, also in border states. The state that has the most records in the Bureau is Virginia, and that's followed by Louisiana. So if you have ancestors that were in each of those locations, you definitely want to be in the Freedmen's Bureau. Mississippi also as well, again, because certain parts of Louisiana were under Mississippi in early Bureau records. Even though it's labeled Natchez, Vidalia, it could be Natchez, but the records are in Vidalia. Like they're mentioning Vidalia. Make sure that you go into the collection and just search and see what you can find. So let's put in a location. I'm just going to put in Carroll. Actually, we want to do East Carroll because it became East Carroll. There we go. And we're just going to search. And again, my suggestion for the Freedmen's Bureau is start broad. Don't drill down to the well in your grandmother's yard. Because if you get too specific, you might reduce the number of records that you want to find. Okay. So my suggestion is don't do that. Start broad because you don't know the location that folks are, that they are, that is referred to on the respective record. And that was what was indexed and made searchable. Great questions. Are these webinars viewable later? Absolutely, they are. They will be on YouTube. Um, and then someone asked, colored infantry also in Freedmen's Bureau? Yes, the U.S. Colored Infantry is also a part of the Freedmen's Bureau. So Freedmen's Bureau had several different operations. And let me know, use the chat. Would you like us to do a session on the Freedmen's Bureau? Because we could totally do a session on the Freedmen's Bureau. We probably need to. Okay, resounding. Folks who are here in the background helping me. People want a webinar on the Freedmen's Bureau. So that sounds like we need to do it. All right, perfect. So, yes, Freedmen's Bureau, several operations, labor contracts, U.S. colored troops, Freedmen's Bureau schools, hospitals, rations, apprenticeships, disputes over apprenticeships and labor contracts. I mean, it is very, very broad. So, there's a number of different records. We're just going to see. I literally just put this in just to see what we could find. Let's click on it and see what it is. All right. And great questions. Oh, yes, someone asked, are you using Ancestry networks to put enslavers on your ancestors' trees or vice versa? Yes. And the flexibility in networks is that you can make a network for whatever you want. Um, and it doesn't matter if you build an enslaver tree and it's from the enslaver's perspective and you add the formerly enslaved, you can do it that way, or you can build a tree for the formerly enslaved and add the slaveholders to the network. You could do either or. All right, so this is a little pixely, but I'm gonna read it out as best as I can. And this looks like, oh, there's an agent here. Here's the head of the Freedmen's Bureau in this respective area. That's George W. Rollins. I know that just because I researched this area a lot. And gosh, these are witnesses to something that is happening in the Bureau. When you get to records in the Bureau and anywhere on Ancestry, One of the things you want to do is, especially the census and other things, if you just land in a place, like somebody just drops you off someplace, you want to know what's going on. So sometimes when you get dropped off in a place, you have to look at the image before or the image after to kind of understand what's happening. And I probably should have picked the basic viewer. Okay, answered that live. Um, okay, some of my ancestors. Okay, someone's got that. Thank God. Uh, Okay. What if you did DNA and you found out you have, in my case, 4% African DNA? How can you find out where it comes from? I had South Carolina slaveholders in the family. I assume it's from them. Potentially, that's very possible, but it could be in South Carolina because there was a free people of color community. You could descend from a free person of color, so don't assume that they were always enslaved. The census records are translated, are Freedmen's Bureau's records translated? It's a great question. I'm gonna ask the community support people that one, but I believe it should be. Okay, looks like we got a better copy of this. Ooh, yes. All right, we can read it now. Okay, so this looks like an agreement. And you are gonna find all kinds of stuff in here, you all, like for real. Um, looks like these are letters entered in, and the thing is, the location is saying East Carroll Parish, but it's a part of the Bureau of Records in North Carolina. And this is a great example, right? I can read it. We're clearing up here. Okay. So, you all, one of the things I want to point out too is sometimes we believe that things were only happening in a small geographical area and wherever our ancestors were, right? Meaning, if my ancestors live in East Carroll or Carroll Parish, Louisiana, the only dealings those folks are going to have are with people and entities that are in that respective place. And that's not true. Not at all. There could be operations and things that they are happening or that they are involved in that are mentioned in other areas. And so here's the thing, the Chamblises, sorry for all this zooming, you all. The Chamblises were a slaveholding family that was in East Carroll Parish. And I'm pulling all these pages out separately so that we can load them, so we can get the context for what this is. You just never know what in the heck you're going to find in the Freedmen's Bureau. Oh, we got a good one. All right. I love when this happens. It's all aligned. Okay. Agreement of apprenticeship. So this is documented in North Carolina's Freedmen's Bureau records, but it's referencing East Carroll Parish where my family is from. Two completely separate states. This agreement in two parts made and entered this day, October 1st of 1866, between Kate Chambliss in the first part and Lieutenant George W. Rollins, Lieutenant USA Agent Carroll Parrish of the Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands, and by virtue of the authority contained in Circular Number 25, dated by Headquarters, Bureau of Refugee Freedmen and Abandoned Lands, New Orleans, Louisiana, October 31st, 1865. Guardian for minor orphans of freedmen for Carroll Parish. Party hath on the record, maybe on the second part, witnesseth that James Lament, Bet Taylor, and Mary Taylor, minor orphans of African descent, are hereby bound and apprenticed to the service of the said Kate Chambliss, party of the first part, and enjoying during the year minority commencing, ending, or as follows. James, maybe Cement, maybe Lament, aged 14 years from the day of October 1st, 1866 to the October 1st of 1870. So what is an apprenticeship? Think about it like indentured servitude, where you have orphan kids whose parents have either died or they cannot take care of them, and they are now being apprenticed out with what appears to be from North Carolina all the way to East Carroll Parish, Louisiana. They're going from North Carolina to Louisiana. A 14-year-old named James, Betty, who's 9, And look at when these terms end, you all, they're well after slavery's over, right? Freedmen's Bureau, most of the records are after slavery's over. So James is being indentured or apprenticed from 1866 to 1870. So hopefully, if you find him on the 1870 census, this is after his apprenticeship is over for the most part, right? He only has a few months left. But he likely has a birth location in North Carolina. And most folks would think, oh, his slaveholder brought him down, when it actually more likely is the Freedmen's Bureau. Because, or it is, because this apprenticeship is telling us that. Betty, same scenario. Her term goes to 1872. Mary, who is 7, hers goes to 1874. Let's get to the second page. Let's see. Kate Chambliss is enjoying consideration of 4 faithful service rendered by within the names. The orphans shall receive comfortable clothes, board, medical treatment. Right. The said parties hereby mutually agree that all laws entered and may be enacted. So this is basically to protect the children. Freedmen, minors, or orphans of the government in the name. Right. They're like, here, we're protecting them. We're here for them. And then we get to the end of this agreement. And look at this, you all. It's in North Carolina, likely because they're bringing these kids from North Carolina all the way to East Carroll. And think about this, you all. They're likely leaving their family, like fictive family, behind in North Carolina, or maybe even distant relations. They're leaving them behind in North Carolina. And this is after slavery. How do you find the Freedmen's Bureau search? It should be, there's a link in the resources area where for the Freedmen's Bureau. Yeah, you could even potentially qualify it as being human trafficking, but it was legal. It was fully legal. Um, Great question. 1870 census shows my great-great-grandfather was a laborer, age 9. He apparently worked for a husband and wife with the same last name. Does this mean he took on the owner last name? Potentially. That's very possible. I would research who those folks are. If you're in an area with the Freedmen's Bureau, can you find an apprenticeship like I just found? Very possible. Now, in addition to the Freedmen's Bureau, this is a big collection that covers a number of states and locations in the United States. A lot of them, right? You also have the Civil War, and you've got service by Black men, and not only Black men, but Black women. What do I mean? These are the U.S. colored troops. 180,000 Black men served on the side of the Union during the Civil War. Why am I pointing this out in the reference of Juneteenth? You don't get to Juneteenth, you don't get to freedom without the U.S. colored troops and them coalescing and fighting and being trained during the war. You do not. So, with there being 180,000 Black men who enlist, and not only just them, but you have women who served in roles as cooks and laundresses and maids for the U.S. colored troops. You even have some men that were orderlies too for those. The men who were soldiers could apply for a pension from the U.S. government for their service. And some of you may have come across a pension card in your respective searches on Ancestry. That card is giving you a ton of information. You can actually take the information that is on the card and you can make a request for the National Archives to make a copy of the pension file. And within that pension file, you will find things like affidavits from your ancestors, from your relatives, potentially from slaveholders. Now, someone asked a question about Black men who served for Confederate whites. Here's where the disconnect is. When the Confederacy actually, voted and approved for Black men to fight, it was the war was over. 13th Amendment had already been passed. So with regard to Black men serving for the Confederacy, they were typically there like 9 times out of 10, like 10 times out of 10. They were there as body servants or as almost like butlers for their slaveholders who were serving. And if they were in that role, they could get a pension, but it was issued by the state, not the federal government. So you will find pension applications on Ancestry, but they are by the state. They're not federal because they were not a part of the federal troops. And so there's that. You will also find enslaved people whose slaveholders leased them out to work on behalf of the Confederacy, and there are Confederate payrolls that document that. Again, different scenario. So let's just put any event, we'll put Louisiana for a pension location, and we'll just search for these cards. Again, we're just searching broadly. You may actually have these as a hint and you just don't realize. Okay. So we've got colored heavy artillery. Let's just pull this one up. And I'm just going to search it. Again, who's alive in your family for 1865 and for Juneteenth? And this card is telling you a lot. Andrew Hamilton was enlisted or had an alias of Andrew Hampton or Hampson. So it's very possible that your respective ancestor, if they were a part of the US colored troops, they may have enlisted under one name and went by another after the war. It is very, very possible that this happened. So pay attention to these aliases because this can help you find them closer to Juneteenth, or it can help you find them as an enslaved person. Note that he has a widow. Her name is Mary. Okay? He was a part of, when you see USC, that's US colored. And it could be infantry, so it might say USCI, or it could be USCT. Heavy artillery is HA. So he was a part of the 5th US colored heavy artillery. The company is E. Notice how we're getting all this information from this card. We know that he applied for an invalid pension February 5th of 1889. So this is even between 1880 and the 1900 census, where we usually have that black hole where we're trying to figure out what's going on with our ancestors because the 1890 census burned. There's a possibility that he is on the 1890 veteran schedules, which is not the general population schedules. But let's say we're in a location that they're not. You're still finding out information. He applied for a pension. It was granted. How do we know it's granted? Because if it wasn't granted, you just have an application number. Because it was granted, you have a certificate number. The state it was filed in was in Louisiana. We know that this Andrew Hamilton was dead by June 24th of 1912 because his wife is filing for a widow's pension. And she received it because there's a certificate number here. You can also do things like look up the military service records for the US colored troops and just do a broad search, right? We can just put in a name. Let's see. I'm putting in a US colored troop that I know. Okay, let's pull it up. Here's a Lewis Carson. Not my ancestor, but one nonetheless. US colored infantry. Okay, let's page through this. What's going on here? If you get a clue to get to one of these, don't just stay on that first page. A lot of people will save the record and they will just stay on this first page that's only giving you a name and a regiment. Go further. Page to the next page. Here is where you get the description of the individual. He's 54 years old, 5'8", brown complexion, black eyes, gray hair, born in Abbeville, South Carolina, a farmer. He enlists July 4th, 1864 in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Even though he was born in Abbeville, South Carolina, he's enlisting in Chattanooga. And it says he's mustered August 8th, 1864, and look, it died of disease January 19th, 1865. So here we have a documentation of the man's death. So don't assume, again, a lot of folks will just save that first page and they won't keep going. Yes, people are saying, I didn't know there was another page. Y'all, you're missing this out, especially for US colored troops. It's telling you month by month what was happening. He was present July and August of 1864. And then we're going to go to the next page. September October, he was present. Due U.S. on account of camp and garrison equipage, 33 cents. So he had to replace something in his equipment. So he owed the U.S. government 33 cents. Yes, you all are, again, U.S. colored troops, anyone with these service cards, you need to be paging through these. November and December 1864, present, still owing the 33 cents. Oh, someone said I knew about the draft cards though. One of the ancestors didn't have an eye. It was missing an eye. All right, January, February. Now, government is due $2.88 for camp and garrison equipage. Excuse me, of course I'm coughing. I'm reading so that somebody's coughing. Died in camp at Chattanooga, January 19th, 1865. And 9 times out of 10, by going through this, we're going to actually see the statement of his death and his personal effects is going to be in here. So look at this. Joined an organization, 1865, born in Abbeville, 54, enlisted July 4th, 1864, in Chattanooga for a period of 3 years, got his description, mustered in, all of that. The fact that he is due a bounty, meaning that he was supposed to be paid money from the US government and he didn't get it. Wonder what makes you, this is a great comment. Makes you wonder what was happening in that camp in Chattanooga, meals or other disease. More men died from disease during the Civil War than actual gunfire. So 9 times out of 10, we're probably going to see typhoid. Yeah, it's just going to say it may actually give us more detail. So last paid, his company, they get mustered out, meaning their service ends in 1866. Measles, right. All of that happens. So he wasn't even in that long, maybe 6 months. And he was old. 54-year-olds, they were not enlisting them like that, you all. They were not. Yeah, he was old for a U.S. colored troop, this guy that we picked. Let's see if we can get to the final statement. Now, the other thing I will point out, slaveholders would make a compensation claim for their formerly enslaved if the slaveholder remained loyal to the Union. They would potentially have made a claim for their value so that they could be reimbursed. So you may find those within the U.S. colored troop records. And it looks like I went back to a person that I didn't need to. Let's see. We need to get to his final statement. Okay, this looks like this is him. Because I went to a Henry Carson, we were on Lewis Carson. I will definitely be going back through the additional pages, USCT. I had no idea. Yes. Y'all are missing it. You're missing the plot. We're not going to miss the plot anymore after this, are we? All right. So here's his enlistment information, tells you he's a farmer. Sometimes on these records, you all, it'll say who the slaveholder is or who claimed them. So some of you might be looking for a former slave owner and be wringing your neck trying to get to it, but the information might be hiding in a Civil War service record because the slaveholder filed a claim, or it's possible that it's listed on one of these little sheets. Here we go. Finally getting to the final statement. Okay. So it's repeating some of the same information. He was a private, born in Abbeville, enlisted in Chattanooga for a period of 3 years. Honestly, faithfully with his company in the field, the present date is now entitled to discharge by reason of death from disease. And it mentions him dying or him being enlisted on July 4th, him owing the federal government money. He is indebted $2.33. The U.S. government said they're going to get their $2.33, even though the man died. Come on now. And he was due a bounty. So what happens in this instance? Because he was due a bounty, his widow could have applied for it. If he didn't have a widow, let's say that maybe his wife passed away, he had minor children, someone could apply for his bounty payment through the which could have been the Freedmen's Bureau because Freedmen's Bureau was over U.S. colored troops up to a certain time before we get Bureau of Veterans Affairs and the Pension Bureau. So someone could apply for the minor children. And if, let's say, he didn't have minor children or a wife, his mother could have applied, his sister could have applied for that bounty. So that's additional information. All right. Interviews with formerly enslaved people. I'm pointing out all of these collections for a reason because Freedmen's Bureau, 1870, U.S. colored troops records, those are pretty ubiquitous. They are going to be broad. A lot of people are going to find hits in those, more likely. These other collections are typically niche. Okay? Meaning it's not as broad, the coverage isn't as broad for everyone. Okay? So, what are these interviews with formerly enslaved people? These are what are called the Works Progress Administration or WPA slave narratives. There are individuals who were interviewed by the WPA during the Depression when there were writers who were out of work and they needed a job. And so one of the projects that the WPA sent out writers, reporters to go and interview formerly enslaved people. If you are lucky to find somebody in this collection, it's great because you're getting firsthand accounts of what life was like for them. So we're going to put in East Carroll because that's what we've been searching for in Louisiana, just because. And we're going to see. It's possible it was mentioned in an interview. For some of these, they have photos of the people. And you may just get really good context on what's happening. So here's a man named Littleton Dandridge who was interviewed. And he mentions East Carroll, Louisiana. And this one doesn't appear to have a picture. So he says he's 80 years of age at this point in the interview. He's interviewed in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. He says, I was born in 57 in East Carroll Parish, Louisiana. Oh, I remember before the war broke out. Yes, ma'am. I had owners, good owners, old master and mistress named James Rayleigh and Matilda Rayleigh. I called her mistress. I remember one time my father carried me to Natchez on Christmas to spend with his people. Notice he's living in Pine Bluff. He's born in East Carroll, and his father took him to Natchez to go and visit their family on Christmas. His parents were servants on a plantation near Natchez. Right. Like, again, the image in this record is of the image that's here. It's not necessarily a picture. For some of these, they do have a picture of the person. But look at this. He's telling you he was born in 57. He's saying who his slaveholder is. And he's talking about his father being, obviously, the dad has got to be in East Carroll because that's where he's born, but that they went to Natchez to go and see his paternal grandparents who were on a plantation in Natchez. These areas are close, but not that close. Super great information here. We get free in 65, and the governor or somebody ordered all the owners to take all the folks back that wanted to go. Right. I remember when we refugeed to Texas. Yes, these are published. Works Progress Administration. Yes, these were published. You can get a printed copy of this. Or you can look at the digital one here on Ancestry. So he says, slaveholder James Rayleigh, Matilda Rayleigh. I remember when we refugeed to Texas in 63. His slaveholders took him to Texas during the war. They raised tobacco there. We got free in 65. Governor or somebody ordered all the owners to take all the folks back that wanted to go. All the young folks, they had them in Tyler, Texas, making bullets. My father had the care of about 50 youngsters making bullets. Old master had 2 plantations in Louisiana and Mississippi. He was a large slaveholder. More niche collections. If you have ancestors who are connected to the Indian Territory, your ancestors likely, if they were freedmen, if they were formerly enslaved, their slaveholders listed on their DOS cards. We'll bring up one for my great-grandfather, where it tells you the names of their slaveholders. Again, niche collections. These are, and you have to figure out what these collections are for the respective region that your family is from. Excuse me. So, great-grandfather, Dawes card. Notice, if he was enslaved, he was born after slavery ended, his slaveholder would be listed here. because it says slave of. But these cards have two sides. Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Muskogee Creek, and Seminole Nations have Freedman cards. Parents' names are on the back. Name of father, Isaac Rogers. Father's owner, Elzira May. Mother, Sally Van. Mother's owner is blank because she was a free person of color. More records. We have over 200,000 names that have been added to Ancestry as a part of the Virginia Untold collections. These have recently been added. If you have not been using these, please, please, please do. What are these collections? There are a slew of records that connect back to the formerly enslaved and also named slaveholders in Virginia. This one is a free Negro tax, a free Negro registration and tax records. And I'm just going to put in Smith. Why not? There's probably going to be one. Okay, Accomack. If you click on the link, it's going to bring you to an indexed record. Smith Shepard was a free Black person. He was living in St. George Parish in Accomack County, Virginia. If you click the URL, it's going to take you to the Library of Virginia site, which is going to bring up the actual image of this list of free Negroes living in St. George's Parish. Taking us a little while to load. Okay, while that loads, there's additional collections. I just pulled some of the ones that had high record counts. You've got bills of sale, deeds of enslaved individuals. You also have wills and probates. Again, we probably need to do an entire session on that just so we have enough time where you can actually go through and search for the names of enslaved people or slaveholders that are mentioned in wills. So let's get back to this free Negro register. And again, this is in Accomack. So these are individuals who were free before the war. George Ames, age not known farmer. Henry Bailey, age not known laborer. Here's a list of free people of color. All right, let me stop sharing because again, I've shared a lot today. I want to be able to make sure that I get to the Q&A that is here. Where'd my window go? Okay, here we go. Found slave deeds with only first names, ages, racial descriptions of the slaves, dated 1848. My problem is where do they go when the owners moved from Arkansas to California for the gold rush? The slaves were divided up between family members. Problem is how to locate the whereabouts of these women, children, slaves who may or may not have been included with the land and property that was sold when the slave owners left for California. How do you know that they didn't come to California? Slaveholders brought their enslaved to California, and they're on the 1850 and 1860 census. And some of them were questionable in their practices because they knew California was a free state. They would take the enslaved out, cross the state line, Nevada, wherever else, on day 364, and then bring them back to restart the clock. If they were divided up between family members, you're going to trace the family members who didn't go to California, find out where they went and where they moved. Yeah, who may not. That's the thing. If they got divided up and sold to family members, you're going to trace the family members they went to. Or you're going to look for transactions that show your known, enslaving family transacting property to other people, and then you will trace through those new slaveholders if they're not family. But you can't assume that they didn't bring them to California because people did it. Where does she say to request a copy of the pension file from? National Archives. National Archives. They have a service that you can use on their site for record reproductions. There are also third-party folks who they will make copies for you as well. Are there audio recordings of the slave interviews? Yes, for some of them there are. For some of them there are. There's also an addendum to them in Oklahoma, or people went to Oklahoma. There's a whole separate set of slave narratives that are there. What I found is a lot of times of the people who have photos, they're in Texas. You will have some where the audio is recorded, so you can actually hear those people too. How do you access 1870 census and the collections that Nika referenced on the June 19th webinar? They should be in the resources section of the Zoom window that we're in right now. Okay, couldn't see them on the census. Okay, they aren't on the 1850 and 1860. You may, again, because they weren't paying taxes on those enslaved. We're going back to the people who went to California. Again, you're following the slaveholder or who the potential slaveholder could be and which records they have that would have recorded enslaved people's names, tax records, deeds, wills, probates, mortgage records, whatever that is, where you can potentially sift them out. How do I trace a U.S. regiment sent to the British Honduras? Ooh, um, that sounds like maybe Revolutionary War. You can look under uh, if it's U.S. regiment and it's while the U.S. is still under British control, we do have those records. In fact, that's how I found out about the Americans, who were they were a U.S. regiment under the British who settled in oh gosh, why am I forgetting? It's not Turks and Caicos. It's Lord, this is gonna drive me crazy. I'm probably gonna Google it just so I won't forget. But they have it was War of 1812, and they were sent to a particular area. It's in the Caribbean, and right, Bermuda and Trinidad. There's a whole area in Trinidad that is named for these Medicons. And the locations in Trinidad are named after the regiments that were sent during the War of 1812. And you can find a regimental list. I found a regimental list for them on Ancestry. It's likely that the same thing for those British troops that were in Honduras might be there too. Depends on the time period, though. How do we know if an audio file, if it exists? Some of them are on the Library of Congress website, so you can listen to them there. Some people have uploaded them to YouTube as well. Yes, someone mentions Biddy Mason. Yes, Biddy Mason, incredible story, founder of First AME in Los Angeles, major landowner, Black landowner in Los Angeles. Her slaveholder brought her to California from Utah and was doing that whole thing where he was moving her back and forth, and she encountered free people of color who told her that it was illegal what her slaveholder was doing, and she sued and she got her freedom. Look up Biddy Mason. She is dope. Civil War pensions link, resources section says resource cannot be found. Is there another available link that can take us there? Yes, I will put it in the chat for you. Let's see, we're gonna go back to our pension link. All right, well, we're a little bit over, but I hope you all got the information that you wanted today. Hopefully, if you are trying to find those ancestors who were formerly enslaved or whoever was alive during Juneteenth, some of the suggestions that I gave you will help you. All right, there is the link for the Civil War Pension Index. So feel free to click on that. And yeah, I will be back soon. We'll be doing another session. We've got a great update happening. Cannot wait to dig into this with you all with one of the collections we release next year. So please make sure you go to ancestry.com/education so you can register for that session and so many more that are taking place. All right, have a great day. Bye-bye.